I want to welcome one more expert to our stage as we continue the conversation. Brad Lynch is the Director of Enterprise Strategy in the Office of the CTO at Veeam. Now, Brad has more than 10 years of experience helping customers recover their data from both disaster recovery efforts and cybersecurity incidents. He's here today to share his experience working with corporate clients all over the place. Brad, welcome to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joseph. And I've enjoyed listening to the comments from Kris and Ashok. It's been great.
Yeah, great conversation so far. I want to get into building the data foundations for growth. And this is important for everybody, regardless of your industry. And given that artificial intelligence and analytics rely heavily on high quality, well governed data, how are you tackling data ownership, quality, and governance to enable both innovation and compliance? Brad, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Going back to Ashok talked about zero trust principles, and a lot of this falls into following the NIST framework and what you can do around governance and compliance. And you mentioned something when you started the call off, Joe. You mentioned it's not when and if, and that's become a common phrase. And I've almost extended that a little bit into it's not when but if, it's how bad the damage is going to be, right? So the more and more I see organizations have that mentality, the better. Kind of that, what I mean by that is that mentality has changed from, okay, let's do everything we can to prevent and detect the attack, which of course you should do, not saying you shouldn't, but albeit that doesn't seem to be quite enough. Ultimately, these attackers are still getting through. They're still able to evade detection, whether it's through AI or through social engineering, which AI has only amplified the social engineering. It's critical that you have a proper plan in place to respond and recover. So, it seems like the question's a bit directly in terms of how some of the services we provide can help. I think Kris's and Ashok's response might be a little different, given that they're suited to be in a situation where they have to they have to figure out which vendors to use or what processes to use to really strategize around that. But there's a lot of things that are provided in terms of uh, ensuring, just from a basic level, from a compliance perspective, you have an immutable backup, let's say, right? The kind of step zero, I say, in response and recovery is an immutable backup. There's so many bells and whistles in the data resilience, data protection industry, but I can tell you for sure that just having uh, an immutable backup that's on a media that's fast performing is your best path to recovery. So we acquired a company called Coveware about a year and a half ago, and they're an incident response firm. And what's interesting about them is they have all sorts of data that's interesting. That's based on their boots on the ground experience, right? This isn't survey data. This is their data based on responding to cyber incidents. But they'll pretty much always tell their clients, unless you're recovering from tape or something like that, if that's going to be your air-gapped copy, it is almost always going to be faster to recover from a backup than it is to decrypt data. It's kind of this myth that decrypting data is you're gonna snap your fingers and all of a sudden your data is magically back. Plus, there's a lot of risk in decrypting data in terms of you might lead to data corruption during that decryption process. And then in terms of governance, ensuring that you know the value of your data, you know where your data is, and how many copies of that data you have, and things of that nature. And you know that from depending on the organization that you're in, if you're in education, if you're in healthcare, if you're in finance, that you're meeting the guidelines that you need from a compliance perspective, but maybe also from a cyber insurance perspective, things of that nature. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps bring some context to your question, Joseph.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Brad. Appreciate those insights. Kris, how about you? It's a little different in education, but I'm so curious to hear how it might apply. These same basic tenets have to happen. You need high quality, well-governed data. How are you tackling this?
Yeah, it's something that I spent a lot more time thinking about probably the last year than I have any other time in my career. Um, it was always, I think back for like the last 20 years, it's always been, let's just keep this data locked down and keep it safe and just keep it where it is. And now you got to think about, well, like, if I want to really do interesting things with this data, how do I keep it safe, but also get access to it from some autonomous, some sort of program that might be a little bit different. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, we're spending a lot more time, thinking through, and probably this is, some failings I might have had in my career, and not doing enough historically to structure the way that we store data. And now I'm kind of looking back and thinking, well, we kind of let people do a little bit of what they want in a sandbox that was keeping things safe, but maybe we needed a little bit more structure, a little bit more thought behind the way that we store data across the organization, and not just your typical rows and columns databases, but just all of the knowledge documents that are generated across, we have 1,000 employees here. And so, and there's a lot of useful knowledge across 1,000 people that have, some of them worked here 40 years. So that they've generated, and what can we do with that to actually help, mine that for more information that could help other people. And so we spent a ton of time thinking about it, and then we were unfortunately a organization that experienced a data breach this year, thanks to one of our vendors, um, that had been doing some things that they promised us they weren't. And so, there's also some conversations thinking about that too. And, part of me goes back to, maybe I need to rely less on some of the vendor partners that I choose, and some of them I need to, tighten down a little bit more. It's really a hard conversation because I need to get more access to some of the data, but I also need to make the security controls around it even tighter than it's ever been. So it's a really interesting dichotomy that you got to kind of bounce around to figure out what to do with. So
It is a lot of challenges, but I'm glad you mentioned mining through the existing data because, particularly in academia, there is, but in any organization for real, so much good thoughts that have been documented and put
yeah,
in various unstructured formats and things. And I could see AI really being helpful in going through and summarizing things to help you understand, how high quality is your data? Do you have it stored in the right places so that it's, being governed
yeah,
well? And I could see that being a big help.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Ashok, how about you? How are you tackling data ownership, quality, and governance?
So primarily, I think, right, that's where now we call it as a data security posture management, right? Primarily, put a process in such a way that if any new documents get created, will be automatically, we call it as a sensitivity label, right? So that, and then it's called a digital rights management. So that now if you say that, okay, this particular document I'm creating is actually have some sensitive data related to your company. Now, if that particular document is intentionally or accidentally shared outside your perimeter, that acts like a brick. So that means, right, even if a hacker gets that particular file, they cannot use it because we have put some preventive controls in place that this document can be only opened if that document is part of a domain joined system, right? So what we try to do is more of a put layer and defense preventive controls in place so that, right, the data doesn't leave. And the second one is that also we call as a data firewall. We can also, what we have done is we put something saying that this particular location is only for sharing public information. So that means if somebody is trying to put some files which has some sensitive data, we scan it and then we move that to a different folder so that at any point in time, those locations which is publicly available will not have any sensitive file. So it's more of a what type of process you're going to put it so that you become proactive than being reactive.
I love that. And it sounds like you have very mature data governance processes and tools in place. I'm just curious, do you think that what you described is possible in your organization because you have just adequate staffing to make sure that this is all handled? Or is it more having the right tools? And then, to enable these processes, or is it a combination of both?
So it's more of a people process and then technology, because right, the technology comes later in that one. So how do you put some guardrails in place, right? Saying that, okay, hey, if you bring something, right, put it in, these things have to go into the kitchen, or these things have to go into the drawing room, right? The same thing, you need to put some process in and then have people start adopting to it, right? You don't need a very expensive tools to do the work, right? And then most of the organization will be subscribed to maybe Microsoft Office, right? If you are subscribed to Microsoft Office, or Microsoft Office do provide some of these features, or Google do provide that, right? So primarily leveraging that, and then what we say is that how do you get your return on investment on the tools what you have invested in, and then put some guardrails around that, so that right, you're not spending too much money on tools, right? You can buy the best expensive tools possible, but if you don't implement it, there is no value out of it.
Understood. People, processes, and then technology.
Yeah.
But with the volume of data going on today, we've got to get to that technology layer at some point, because there's just simply too much to handle by manual process. So I appreciate you sharing how you're handling it there, Ashok.